The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Boardwalk Tech webinar, Blockchain for the Enterprise, Use Cases for Food and Beverage. We've got a lot of people signed up for our half-hour meeting here today, so I'm going to go through some slides, introduce some concepts around blockchain and specific use cases for food and beverage. But if you have any questions, please feel free to use the question pane inside of the GoToWebinar app. We may not be able to answer all the questions today during the half hour because we want to respect everybody's time. But if you have any questions, we will certainly follow back up with you and answer any questions you might have. So let's get started and kind of look at how we see blockchain fitting within the context of the enterprise today. And honestly, I think all of you are focused on digital transformation, right? I think this is the goal of every company, regardless of industry, is they're always trying to, or you're always trying to do better in terms of the interactions for information you're getting from your clients and how you're running your business. And historically, the traditional enterprise has really been working a lot off of the historical data. So you've got your strategy about how much you want to grow the business. You've got some market research about trends for particular foods or consumption habits for your clients, and then you've got your POS data, and you kind of crank through the traditional method. A lot of times doing trade promotion optimization, where you're looking at what happened last year and then trying to optimize the spread of what products should be where and at what price. But really in today's enterprise, it's much more important to have that capability coupled with the collaboration, because in the context of the digital enterprise, you learn a lot from the interactions that you're having with your customers in terms of collaborations on the demand side. When you're putting products out, you're trying to see the effect of this promotion, and on the supply side, WIP and all the other things that are associated with sourcing your products, and if you have contract manufacturers, understanding pricing and all those types of things. And then, as this data matures, there's opportunity to mine the data and learn things from that. That'll, you have trust in the information, and you really are heading towards what we call the agile information flow groups. You're getting as much speed and efficiency as you can out of the exchange, and you're learning from not only the interactions, but also the operational events, right? So something happens where you have a stock out or you have a problem with a line. A lot of times you just use that on a reactionary basis to go in and make an adjustment. But, that's an important data point from a learning perspective for your enterprise. And if you have, a digital enterprise, you're able to take advantage of that. But the problem is that, the business models are changing all the time, especially, in food and beverage, and new ways to reach products and bundling and all these other things. So it's very hard to, program SAP to do this work, or for that matter, any transactional data environment, because these systems are, designed to effectively execute your business and say, go ahead and run this process so I produce these many packs at this particular factory. But the variability and misalignment that comes with that, especially as you focus on multi-party exchanges, is a part that has never really been solved from a company perspective. And so the question is blockchain technology the answer for this? I mean, how does this fit within the context of multi-party exchanges? And we think that this is a great place to start. I mean, for those of you that have spent time looking at the use cases in blockchain, and you look at kind of the categories of blockchain opportunity from folks like Gartner, I mean, they talk about, transformative track and trace. And I'm sure all of you have read, Walmart asking their suppliers to do the tracing of, information associated with their products as they move through the supply chain for, recalls and sustainability. But those are serial processes. That's a data environment where you've got a person doing a single touch, and then they hand it off to the next person, they do another single touch. And that's fine, and that's an important part of the business. But we also think there's a tremendous amount of multi-party exchanges that happen on a continual basis with your trading partners about what are you building this week? What are the issues around the purchase order that I put in? How have I done on my promotion plan? And all of that work for the most part today, is still exchanged manually between companies because they're not logging into your ERP or your production planning system. And yet there's a dependency on the exchange of information between all these parties in order to have your business run effectively. So what blockchain gives you is the ability to bring this transactional exchange of information into what we call a digital ledger. And this digital ledger can then be shared between all of the parties involved in the collaborative exchange of data. And since you're using a common digital ledger, you're able to get alignment because everybody is seeing the same data. You're able to collaborate because, again, you're sharing the same data, and as it's changing over time, which is the main tenet of a ledger, you're able to see changes by other people and understand the impact of those changes and then go through another interaction. And it's temporal, so everything is time-based. And if you think about your transactional systems, that's one of the biggest issues is that if you look at SAP and there's a number that says 50 for a stock number, you don't know where that number came from. And it's very difficult to program in all of the capabilities around versioning and logging and then putting in the capabilities to detect the differences and all those things that are associated with what you need for blockchain. And yet the digital ledger needs that capability, and that's something what we focus on specifically. And then the blockchain gives you the ability to make the transaction trusted because you can elevate transactions through smart contracts to say, hey, these are the ones that I want to be able to put on the blockchain ledger itself as a final transaction. Now, we like this example of what we call the litmus test for blockchain use cases. And if you look at the different kind of parameters associated with it, we've already mentioned multiple parties sharing data, right? And again, you could say that the track and trace is multiple parties sharing data, so it's important to look at the updating data. So there's some exchange of information, not just that a supplier put in that my ship date is October 15th. It's that they put in the ship date is October 15th, and then 3 days later they changed it to the 16th. And then another day later they changed it to the 17th. And as they're doing that, that data impacts everybody else that's in that supply chain. And you need to have a data environment that can support multiple parties updating the data at the same time. And if you multiply that times all the different people that need to potentially touch the data, not only from a collaborative point of view, but from a payments perspective or quality or verification, some of those things you can bring onto the blockchain themselves because the data ledger itself is self-reconciling as people are working through the information. So the verifications there, a need to have some sensitivity around time. In other words, if something is not aligned or there's some delay in the process, then there's going to be a business impact for it. And then finally, this transactions interacting with each other. It's similar to what I talked about in terms of multiple parties updating the data, and that somebody makes a change and you have to react to it, and then you have to put something in and then they have to react to it. That's a great example of use cases for blockchain that make a lot of sense. And if we translate kind of the conceptual into the literal names, here's some examples of different use cases that we've looked at for different clients and been working on in terms of potential opportunities. Certainly one of them is reconciliation around trade. There's a tremendous amount of work that we've been doing historically with companies like Coke and Heineken and customers in the space where they're doing trade promotion with all of their partners, and they're running the trade promotion system on a digital ledger, and then they're saying, well, wait a minute, when we're done with this, then we have to go through this whole reconciliation process where the SAP order needs to be lined up with the order from the client to say, how do I reconcile these events, against what was agreed to from a trade perspective. And there's a tremendous amount of effort that goes into figuring that out because they don't have, end-to-end visibility. There's really no way to audit the records that can be instantly and independently verified, which is what blockchain gives you the ability to do, because as your transaction reaches a certain state, you're able to say, okay, now commit the elements of this data to the blockchain ledger. And then all the parties can go in and say, hey, what did we agree to, and how can I be confident that this data has not been tampered with? And the blockchain technology gives you that capability. And then there are other ones about, of course, food safety, logistics and payment terms, sustainability, redundant intermediaries, fraud and counterfeiting. I mean, these are many of the ones that we've read about and we talked with different clients about. And where we tell people to focus today is kind of in two areas. One, in areas that you control. While we agree that it's going to be great to have a single portal where everybody might go in the future to be able to say, hey, did this avocado, have some issue? But that's a little bit longer term, because then you're trying to get all the suppliers that work with all the different companies to all work on a single blockchain in the sky. And that may come over time right now, but right now, the one that makes more sense is where you're controlling the interaction with the parties that you work with. And you and your extended supply chain are getting the greatest benefit out of the interaction, efficiency, and cost recovery, as opposed to, at least today, trying to discover new business models or try and go figure out how to work with your competitor. We think that will come, but we think that's a little bit further down the line. And we also say that from a focus perspective, it should be in what we call the private permission blockchain area. And for those of you that have spent any time, kind of looking at the blockchain space, you probably have an idea of, how many different application environments there are in terms of blockchain. And the public permission list is best known in the context of Bitcoin, right? Where you have a simple transaction, small blocks of data where, I'm selling to somebody else a Bitcoin and it's $22 and I sold it on this date. Well, this is an anonymous and untrusted blockchain environment. So this is why they have the proof of work and the verification algorithms and the crypto, because it has to reconcile itself in order to come up with the 21 million coins and then figure out what the current value is of Bitcoin. And that's great. And it's a perfect example of how this blockchain technology makes sense for this particular application. But when you bring this over to the enterprise, we do not think it makes sense to take proof of work and verification algorithms and cryptography into the enterprise, because the enterprise, who you're working with. And certainly for our customers, from a blockchain perspective, if they're working with Target and they're working with Kroger's, both Target and Kroger's do not want each other's data to be on their separate nodes. That's not the way companies want to interact with their data. They want access control for the information so that it's a shared digital ledger, but only the people that are supposed to see the data they're supposed to work on get access to the information. Also, the transactions are complex. It is not just 3 data elements. It's who's the supplier, what's the product, what's the current ship date, what's the proposed ship date, what's the original cost, what's the adjusted cost, if you think about it, there's just a potential of all sorts of data elements that need to go on this ledger. And other technologies require that you code this entire data environment in order to stand up the application. And yet, most of them do not handle time very well, which is where we focus. And then also, we believe it's important that all the transactions are captured, not just final transactions, because a lot of the work that happens in what we call WIP is very significant in growing the understanding of what the transaction is in the finality of it. And this is really where we focus from a technology perspective, is that we came up with the digital ledger technology and were awarded a patent for it in 2008. And we've been working with Fortune 500 companies now for 14 years across many, many different industries, with companies like Coca-Cola and Heineken and other ones inside the food and beverage space. And all of the interactions that we're doing with these companies is supporting the collaborative exchange back and forth between themselves and their trading partners. And about a year and a half ago, we've been long-term partners with both IBM and Oracle, and they said, hey, you guys have the perfect digital ledger technology that can be used to support blockchain applications, because blockchain applications need to understand provenance, they need to understand time, they need to have access control capabilities, and all of those things are part of our underlying technology, which is this patented shared digital ledger. Typically how it works is that the information from your transactional systems will be pushed into the digital ledger. So the Boardwalk solution and blockchain is not simply a bolt-on where you go and say, hey, let me add a blockchain field to my SAP. That's not the way blockchain works. What you end up doing is you end up taking data elements from your ERP system, like my current orders, putting that in the digital ledger, and then putting in a whole bunch of additional information, and then letting users interact with it inside of a browser, inside of Excel, on a mobile device. And as the data changes over time, the ledger is recording all the updates by the users. And then once the data reaches a state that kicks off based on a smart contract, an agreement of information, then that data can be pushed off to the Boardwalk digital ledger or blockchain ledger, or it can be pushed out to other external networks. So if you're already doing work or considering doing work with Hyperledger or anybody else, you can still use the Boardwalk data environment in order to manage the digital ledger and the data that you're trying to capture, and then also commit that information out to the blockchain ledger itself. And this is really where we differentiate ourselves, is that we, unify the enterprise. Because if you look at the data that's on a ledger and think about this as a row of information that's being shared between multiple parties, well, typically some of the data is going to be information that's associated from your transactional system. So this will be pulled through integration. But then you need to have information from, your partners about, what's my inventory, or what's my projected on-hand inventory. And then there's a bunch of collaborative and judgment-based sets of data that are associated with all of this information. And with other systems, in order for this to be set up as a data environment, this entire record object tends to be locked. So you can't have multiple people all working on the same data at the same time. And there's no versioning capability built in naturally as part of a database. So all of this has to be structured separately. Then you have to write the coding to do the logging. Then you have to write the coding to be able to go in and say, what was the old value and what was the new value, in order to support the if-then that people are doing inside of blockchain. And that's a very difficult thing to set up. And yet this type of data environment is what is needed for a blockchain application. If we take it, one layer lower, just so we get set on the technology, the way data is managed in the enterprise today, there's two modalities, right? It's either in a file, like an Excel file, in which case you, again, have no concept of time, and you really can't tell what's changed unless you open up the file. And then even when you do that, there's nothing in Excel that easily makes it so you can find out that, this value used to be 50, and it was changed by, John, for example. Or you go the other way and you say, well, I'm going to put it inside of a SQL database or inside of SAP or one of my transactional systems. In that case, the entire record is locked, and you can't have multiple people working at the same time on the same data. And there's no journaling unless you go in and you set that up in each one of these fields. And then if you apply timestamps against that, it's against the entire record. And then if you want to do comparisons to say, hey, the old value was this and the new value was that, that has to be coded. Whereas in the Boardwalk digital ledger, which is what we have a patent on, we're managing data at the single address level. So any data element that's in the ledger, whether this is promotional data, work in process, inventory, pricing, material management, factory planning, anything that you manage in a grid, right, which is basically any enterprise data, or documents. So you can store inside of this individual address, a survey or a quality report. And as this information is versioned over time, these transaction IDs are created. And it says who did this, when did they do it, and each time somebody makes a change, this transaction ID is recorded with either the individual change or the set of changes that were done at the same time, so you can understand, the relationship between the data as it moves through time. And then what this gives you is the provenance and immutability. So if you think about this grid of data and you introduce this notion of time to it, then here's a grid that has a bunch of rows and columns and cells that are being managed. And as you can see here, as it moves through time, it's saying, well, who did this? And when was it done? What was the comment associated with it? And then all of the changes themselves are stored in the digital ledger with a timestamp and the old and the new value. And this change management capability is essential, as I said, for the if-then statements that are in blockchain, because everything in blockchain is time-based. And if we're sharing something and the data value changes and you want a smart contract to be able to work on that, the ledger technology that Boardwalk provides has that capability built in order to understand the time and execute against the, the business changing or the data values changing over time. And if you kind of, pull all these pieces together, we think the Boardwalk transaction chains are really the key to digital transformation, because, what's happening is you're first going to enable this capability for, transaction chaining, where you're able to elevate the trust and integrity of the data. You're able to understand how it's changed over time, and see everything that's being modified by people and understanding the provenance. And if you do that, then you're able to have alignment for the data, right? Because as it changes over time, you're seeing a change that somebody else did, then you're seeing the change that you did, and then that alignment and speed of reconciliation happens faster. And then leveraging this information over time, you're able to learn from it so that you can do inferences about, am I going to have a concern about this particular supplier? Or does it look like this product line's in trouble because it keeps slipping from its production date? So maybe there's an issue with this particular line that I need to look at. All of this is possible when you start using a digital ledger that understands time and gives you insight into all of the changes that happen for the underlying data. And the approach that we have from Boardwalk is very different than other systems. As I mentioned, with other systems, it is a transactional log. That's what a blockchain is you take a set of data, you put it into a digital ledger, you cipher it in conjunction with the previous hash, and then you create a new hash, and they're linked. Well, all of that needs to be custom built with other systems. If you're using Hyperledger or anything else, you have to build the data environment, then you have to do the if-then environment, then you have to do access control, work for all of those things. Whereas the capabilities inside of Boardwalk, all of this is included as part of the core platform. So you're able to stand up an application in a very short amount of time that directly fits with the work that you do today. And what type of work do you do? Well, there's a lot of work that's being done, as I said, in trade promotion, where you want to be able to do joint business planning with your clients and say, for my various products that I'm working with, what are all the things that I'm interested in tracking? How is that information changing over time? Within the digital ledger environment, you're also able to leverage formulas directly, so you don't have to go back and recode formulas like you do in some other systems. And then you're also able to layer on a blockchain to say, hey, this particular data element is one that's specifically of interest, and I want to elevate that and make that part of the transactional data that I have on the blockchain that's going to be, irrefutable and shared between the parties to say, okay, this is what we agreed to, so therefore we can use a smart contract to say, go ahead and pay and settle this promotion because we're aligned on it. And likewise, you kind of go across the board for different work that is done with different clients, especially when you have, lots of parties that you're interacting with, whether it's suppliers or whether it's distributors. And all of the data can be managed inside of this digital ledger grid. And the digital ledger grid only has the data that's associated with that particular party. So a particular distributor would see only their information, but distributors in other parts of the country are not seeing that data, and yet the shared ledger has all of this information on it as it changes over time. And then as the data changes and you come to agreement and say, this is a finalized pricing agreement between the two companies, then you can say, hey, commit that to the blockchain so that I have an irrefutable version of what we agreed to. And the ROI can be, really significant. We pulled this out as just one example of a company that had 40 people manually working with data, emailing things back and forth, working in spreadsheets, which are, of course, the first digital ledger that's been used in the enterprise. And about 10% of everyone's time was spent chasing around, just trying to figure out who's got the latest data, who made this update, and then people going back in and updating the same thing over again because somebody checked out a file and somebody didn't check in their changes. And that kills everyone's time, and it also introduces a tremendous amount of extra cycles into the process. So using a digital ledger and applying blockchain to it, you're able to go from 6 weeks down to 1 to 2 weeks, which is huge. So not only are you recovering everybody's time, but you're also giving everybody the opportunity to do something 4 times in a month instead of once. So think about what that can do in terms of your, your inventories, your effectiveness, your promotions, everything else gets impacted tremendously by being able to, take this type of iterative and collaborative exchange and apply that to the business in terms of, productivity savings. And then because you have a sharper resolution on the planning horizon, the inventories almost without exception are going to be reduced because you're able to see the turnover more quickly and then make adjustments about, well, where am I carrying too much stock, or maybe this promotion needs to be tweaked because either I have something perishable or I'm competing in a particular market or I'm doing a new product. I mean, all of those things are more greatly enhanced when you're able to collaborate and do interactions more quickly. So kind of in summary, as we're coming up to the bottom of the half hour, the things that you can get out of blockchain are, as I said already, the cycle times, which is huge, and then the productivity, which again is very large, and being able to combine both of those almost without exception improves margins across the business that you're working with. And then most people don't really track the errors associated with data sync, but if you think about the exchanges you have just inside of your company, then you layer onto that the exchanges you have with your external partners, whether it's on the demand or the supply side, and you think of all of the work that goes into setting up a digital exchange, the Boardwalk Ledger does not have to be preconditioned for an application. It can take data from POS, it can take data from Nielsen, it can take your projections from your planning system, whether it's SAP or Anaplan or anything else, and set it up in a digital ledger environment so that people can collaborate over that, rapidly come to an agreement, and then commit those agreements to the blockchain and also leverage the smart contract capabilities in order to automate some of the things that are done manually today. And by doing that, the efficiency that you get is going to be tremendous, and you're able to reinvest back in the business. And we think that, from a blockchain perspective, that's a much more effective usage of blockchain technology, is to leverage it for the productivity and efficiency gains, and then reinvest that in the business rather than look at blockchain and say, oh, this is a new way for me to support my consumers buying something, without touching any of my existing channels. That may come in time, and I'm not discouraging that, but we also think that it's important that you understand how blockchain can be applied to any multi-party interaction, really as a collaborative EDI, as a base capability, and then continue to leverage the technology to make, the transactions between parties, touchless where appropriate, as part of your digital transformation process. So I want to leave everybody with, kind of a call to action. We do a lot of work with clients, as you might imagine, having been around for 14 years on different enterprise use cases. So we will do a no-cost use case evaluation, and we can also do a no-cost demo for you. I mean, provided that it's not overly complex, but of course we also do POCs in order to give people visibility into, how the technology works. And we're also running a special with the Boardwalk Enterprise Blockchain Service, where there's no per user cost up to 1,000 users, which, if you think about applications in your business, there tends to be, lots of exchanges with lots of people. And the Boardwalk system is not on a node basis, and it's not on a transaction basis like some other blockchain approaches. It is licensed as a software service. So it's very easy to stand up and leverage. I see the questions that are coming in, and we will answer those questions separately because we're actually at the bottom of our half hour and we want to be respectful of everybody's time. But please email us at info@boardwalktech.com. We will also reach out to you to hopefully, have a more interactive and two-way conversation about use cases for blockchain in food and beverage. But I'd like to thank everybody for their time today, and hope everybody has a great rest of the day. Thank you so much.